Good morning. Patrick is late as usual, but it's Tuesday, the 18th of August. Okay, get in there, Patrick. Truancy will not be tolerated.
You okay with the door open?
Yes, of course. We'll see what it does to the camera. Can you try, before you sit down, can you tilt the camera upward a little bit? Your ring camera. Just like a couple millimeters. That's it. Let's try seeing you sitting down. Okay, talk. Oh, you gotta grab your headphones though.
Oh, that's a good point. Oh, look how discombobulated.
Don't careful the camera, because it's perfectly placed.
You're perfectly placed.
What is this now? Our sixth or our seventh?
I think 7, right? Didn't we determine we had 6?
I think
We had
so.
3.
Yeah.
Three guests.
So, what's happening? Is it completely?
What? I haven't been able to solve a single puzzle today.
How's your volume? Get closer. Get a little closer to the mic.
I want it to be.
The shot's great. Your lighting on you is better than ever. I actually like this shot better than I've ever liked it.
Great.
Your beard has the most wonderfully nuanced darks.
And you wanted me to cut it off.
Yeah, now I'm it's growing on me like a fungus.
It's growing on me like a beard.
So,
Good morning, Tal.
good morning. So my father used to tell me these stories about himself with his friend Salvador Dali, and but I never knew how much he was exaggerating, because he was one of these he had this very Italian relationship to truth, in the sense that you must never let the truth get in the way of a good story, and he would often tell stories that happened to other people as if they happened to him, because it's boring to hear somebody say, "Oh, this thing happened to my friend." So purely for the sake of the listener, more than a self-aggrandizing thing, because it could even be something embarrassing or something, he would tell this story to try and personalize it. And he always say, "The other day this happened," when it could have been 30 years ago. And I remember he had this Spanish girlfriend. It would drive her crazy. And once she'd say, "I know this didn't happen to you." And she'd say, "No, I swear it happened to me." And she goes, "It did not. It happened to me. And I just told you this story yesterday."
I interviewed once for a piece I was writing, a kind of nonfiction essay on virtual reality and whether or not memories, whether or not like virtual memories are encoded the same in the brain as real memories. And Paul Bloom, a Yale psychologist who's written all about this, said that he went to his high school reunion and he started telling a story, I believe, about jumping into the water off a cliff or something. And this guy was looking at him strange in the circle the whole time. And the guy said, at the end of the anecdote, he like pulled Paul aside and said, "That didn't happen to you. That happened to me." And so people do this accidentally all the time, like source memory of what happened to you versus others. We like, in order to listen to a story, you have to you have to put yourself as the central protagonist in it. So I wonder
Oh,
the
that's
degree to
interesting.
which, right? And
But
and it uses the same language that you use to tell yourself stories.
but also Italians do have a different relationship to truth. Like
Mm.
they know Americans are known for having this like truth at all costs attitude, which they find weird and overly blunt. So the most obvious manifestation of this is that if somebody in Italy is going to die, the doctor will never tell them that.
Mm.
They'll say you're going to be fine. If once they've lost all hope,
Yeah.
they'll say like, okay, you know, and they think it's arrogant for the doctor and too fatalistic and you know to pretend that they know they can, so they will just say, you know, we can't do anything more, but you might be fine, and sometimes that is the case. I wonder sometimes if telling somebody they've got 24 hours to live, you know, might cause them to have 24 hours to live, and telling them that they're going to have, you know, an indefinite amount of time might give them an indefinite amount of time.
And do you think the rationalization is that it's best for the patient, or that it's best for the kind of the healthcare system at whole, or the storytelling embedded in Italian culture?
Yeah, I just think that there's a more pragmatic attitude towards truth.
Mm. Do you know Werner Herzog's ecstatic truth?
Do you know pragmatism is
Do you know-
true but not
do you know-
but
do you know-
doesn't
do you know?
work? No, tell me. Yes, there's ecstatic
Ecstatic
truth.
truth.
Exactly. He
Sounds
is
very
the
similar.
great sense of that. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Anyway, so back to Dali and my father. I know they were friends because I would see photos of them together, and I had this great audio tape of an interview my father did with Dali, and talking about it was amazing how surreal, how deep the surrealness of Dali went in his way of thinking about the world. And I remember my dad asking him, like, do you believe in God? And he says, well, you know, there's a lot of errors concerning God. You know, a lot of, they said, first of all, people think of God as being intelligent, and why would the most perfect being have this affliction that's uniquely human, and that we call intelligence? And then we always think of God as this grand being, but actually, if we have to anthropomorphize him, I would say God is a little man about the size of the cane that I carry around, and he has no eyes and no mouth and no ears. And anyway, this was a brilliant little tape that I've unfortunately lost. But so my dad used to tell me these wild sexual, body tales of Dali. That Dali had a deal with his wife, his beloved muse and lifelong wife Gala, that he was not allowed to sleep with other women, but if he fell for another woman or was attracted to one, he could have someone sleep with her on his behalf, and he could watch and he could direct the action. And my dad would tell me that he was often the person who was called in to be Dali's stand-in. And again, this seemed a little far-fetched to me, so I kind of always took these stories with a grain of salt. And then now, thanks to Google Books, I did a search like Salvador Dali, Salvador Ruspoli, and I came across this book, Sex, Surrealism, Dali and Me. And I have to give a little warning, this is not for all ears. If you are easily offended by wild sexual tales, stop listening right now and stop watching. But so Dali, it turns out he would refer to his penis as his limousine, but someone else wrote in another book that I found in doing a similar search, that it was more of a Fiat 500 than a limousine. And this is a book by a guy named Carlos Lozano.
Wait, you searched for the length of Dali's penis?
No, it was when I was looking up the stories with my dad, there was a few books that referred to these tales, and a few of them referred to what you'll hear again now. So Dali with his penis in the palm of his hand was outrageous, even sad. And there was something else. Dali did not like his penis. It was too small or too something. He was an aesthete with an appendage he despised. You must love your own penis. You must love yourself in order to love others. And this was the divine's dilemma. The divine is him. They used to refer to him as that. He did not love anyone. He respected Gala. He was amused by Louis XIV, by Amanda, by me. But the love that sprang occasionally to his lips was absent from his heart. Love is a ghost. We may talk about the phantom, but who has seen him? Dali throttled the shriveled serpent that as a skinny boy he hid between his legs, pretending he was a girl. And seeing the great painter and teacher and patron in this performance confused me and stayed with me like the knife scar scribbled on the cheek of Don Flamenco. Even when masturbating, you need to draw imaginary pictures of your object of love. Dali's canvas was blank, and his features had grown feral and anguished. He stopped when Dado Ruspoli entered the room. "Say how do you do to the prince," he said quaintly. I put my hand out, and Dado put his thing into it. His thing. I shook it. It was the only thing to do. "The prince has the largest limousine ever," Dali said proudly. "The biggest polla in history." And it was. It was like a painting. The prince was like a painting, tall and balding with a big Roman nose and a high aristocratic forehead. He had the dull, clever eyes of an opium eater and very big hands. He began masturbating. So did Dali, together, like two windmills on the high plains of La Mancha. Then the wind ceased. They paused in unison. There was a chair in the center of the room. Dali urged me to stand on it, and he put a bouquet of tuberoses in my arms. I couldn't help think of Edward James. He would have loved to have been there in the room at that moment. "You are an angel," Dali said sweetly. He held my chin and turned my head to one side. "You must look up," he added. And arranging the flowers, I became a figure in ecstasy in Botticelli's Mystic Nativity, the centerpiece for a tableau vivant. Dado removed the two-way mirror, and the two men continued to masturbate, the prince with the finest member in Europe, and the divine with his little object of despair. That's my favorite line in the whole thing. I'd been instructed to look up, but I was looking down as well. Of course, I'd never seen anything like this before in my life, and I'd never seen Dali so excited. He was prancing back and forth. I could hear rhythmic gurgles and gasps from the bedroom. Dado was very relaxed with his monster, very patient. He was waiting for Dali. Dali was impotent, he always said. He needed more help than the others. Like the two nymphs of the Garden of Delight, Louis XIV and Tina de Klerk, Dado's lover, the daughter of the Chilean ambassador, entered the salon and stood in the background. Then the Virgin joined us with her brother and the twin, completing the diorama that Dali had carefully arranged. It was the moment. He screamed. His whole body shuddered. He had made it. He caught his milky speck of orgasm in the palm of his hand, rushed over to the girl, and like the Pope, made the sign of the cross on her forehead with his semen. Post coitum omni animal triste, which I think means after sex, every animal is sad. Dado exploded like a prehistoric volcano, and the two men left the room, the alien suite, for Dali's own rooms across the corridor. The submarine was invented by a Catalan anarchist, he was saying. And it goes on. Anyway.
So that changed a little bit of the story to say Dali was impotent and had the most trouble. So do you think sex to him was just too earthly and benign? Because that's a different story of, oh, I have this pact with my wife and she allows me to fuck people, but I do it through this avatar of other men that I invite into the room. It's very different than being impotent and getting off on that because it's kind of the last thing left to you.
Right. No, it's true. It's true. But I mean, I heard other stories as well that, maybe I shouldn't get so into this. Maybe it's a little much, but he did sometimes go for it as well and got in trouble with his wife a few times. And the stories will emerge. We could probably have a whole podcast just based on my father's stories. What are you? I heard you whispering things to yourself during the. That mic is very sensitive.
I was just kind of mouthing my critical response as it happened. I think it was something about how you quoted every animal gets sad after sex.
What's it? Post coitum.
Post coitum.
Omni animal triste.
Sure.
So it must be after sex. Every animal.
Yeah, and I only said and before and during.
Okay.
But I mouthed it for the people that can lip read. Oh, I guess my beard covers that up. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know how.
I don't know
who I'm communicating to. The ASMR folk.
Anyway, I thought we could use this as a.
Let's talk about dads.
Let's talk about dads. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't know if we should talk. I want to devote a whole episode to like male sexuality.
Yeah.
But we could also do talking about fathers. That would be a good Freudian way to get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So what I know is that my dad was a kind of shithead alcoholic who couldn't hold a job and retired. Basically, like, how there's suicide by cop, there's also suicide by Belize, which is you just go to a Central American country where the dollar can last a little while and where alcoholism and chain smoking is kind of acceptable. And where so some people are not born into princedom, but they can take their luck of just being born into a first world country, and by virtue of traveling to a third world country, become automatically hierarchically similar to a prince by fiat, by passport stamp, by passport. I guess the American passport, the American dollar, that kind of thing. So what's interesting to me about these kind of like fabulous stories that you said your dad would tell them is I have no memory of ever meeting my father, and what that means though is that I've heard stories have trickled down to me. Oh, I'm gonna say up. Stories have trickled up to me, and I know they're wrong. I know they're fabulous on some dimension, right? Because what people do when they know a son doesn't know their father is they try to mythologize them.
Yeah.
And so
even having a faraway father, people would do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they want to try to impart the virtues and the potential good of just like having a man in a house. Like, how are you supposed to, like, I don't know how to, I was never taught how to, I never was able to even watch. I have no training data on like how to act like a man at a dinner table, how to shave, how to
clearly.
Yeah. Fair. Touche. Yeah, see, if I had a fucking dad, this beard would be gone. And well, so what's interesting is like I had to pick and choose the father figures I wanted in life.
Mm-hmm.
I had to pick and choose the ones from film. Which kind of adventure romance protagonist from the late 80s do I want to be? It was no coincidence to me that during my PhD, my committee was 5 old men that judged me and were disappointed in me. Right? Like I finally, for the first time in my life, I felt like I was having like a tribunal of father figures just tell me that they were disappointed in me and I could finally move on. And I've sought this kind of, because so the funny thing is I am the height that I am. I've been all the heights.
How tall are you for people just
6'4"?
6'4".
And so I've been all the heights up until then, but my grandfather, as the story is told to me, it was 6'6". My father was 6'5". And what this means is like I feel mythologically like I'm shrinking.
Shorter.
Yeah, like my genetic lineage we're regressing to the mean. And so I have his jacket. So I have a jacket of his and a watch of his. And we were talking about objects in an earlier podcast, right? I have these 2 things, but I have 3 things of his. I have a jacket of his, which is always going to be too big for me, which is funny because I'm a full-grown fucking man, but it's still too big for me. And so I feel still in this kind of like letter jacket. He was an Olympic pole vaulter or Olympic diver and pole vaulter. And so like I perpetually feel like there's this mythological like demigod, like larger than life Poseidon style figure that will always be taller than me, always be more charming than me, always be
Impossible.
more athletic, always like my mother only told stories about how charming he was and how he owned a room. And she told me these stories about how he would deflect rejection and he was never jealous and he was so confident. And all her stories were about these prototypes of male father figures, thinking that would somehow like impart on me what it means to be a man. But you don't learn through those stories. You learn through observing. You learn through watching an actual person, an actual human being confront an emotion.
But we also learn through mythology.
But not in this critical window. Yes, I do think fiction. I learned more from Anna Karenina than I have any relationship I've been in, and but that's because I have like an adult level skill at simulating now. But as a kid, you don't. And as a kid,
maybe it's not just simulation. Maybe there is like a deep truth inside those stories that actually opens up a way of seeing the world that doesn't. I remember dreaming when I was like 12 that I still have the image that I took a big knife and stabbed my father through the head and into like a wall. And I woke up terrified and I said to my dad, I described the dream to him, and he said, "That's wonderful." And he said, and of course Freud was much more taken seriously back then, and everyone had this kind of like subtext of Freud, and it seems, like killing your father is the most important thing you can do. And so then cut to years later, I get obsessed with playing chess, and And I also adopted fathers because my father was wonderful but far away, and I also had just this kind of mythology around him. So I would find like male figures that were closer to me, and kind of adopt fathers. And one of my adopted fathers was my former uncle-in-law named Alexander Cockburn, who was this brilliant polemicist, journalist, and one of the greatest writers that the English language has known. And it turns out, before he was writing about politics and writing for The Nation and all of this, he was also a strict Freudian, and he wrote his first book when he was 35, a Freudian analysis of the game of chess. And so shelve that for a second. Then my friend Mark Rathall, another more older brother type figure in my life, he's a professor of philosophy at Oxford. His father told all of his 4 children when they were small, if you can ever beat me at chess, I'll give you $100. And all the kids kind of learned. Most of them gave up, but my friend Mark spent all his time learning chess, and then finally joined the chess club, did all this studying. Finally, at age 16, he beat his father for the first time, and it took him like 12 years, and then he stopped playing chess after that. So, Cockburn's analysis of chess is as this kind of infantile, constant ritualized patricide. So you have these people who will refuse to grow up, refuse to kill the father once and then move on, and they want to like enact this over and over again by like. And then he said it's a kind of form of masturbation because you have these like hard wooden pieces that the each side kind of holds, and it's usually men who engage in this. And Bobby Fischer, who was the greatest chess player at the time, was famously misogynistic. He like hated his mother, hated women. His most famous chess game, he sacrificed the queen in the 5th move or something, and showed that he could win even without this powerful woman.
That's fucking awesome,
right? And
he was also a paranoid schizophrenic.
Yeah, and he used his misogyny. He used chess to justify his misogyny, saying that women will never play chess as well as men do. And Cockburn's response to that was, women lack the neurosis to make them at all interested in playing this stupid game. And so I told Mark the story of this interpretation of chess, and he goes, "Oh my God, I can't believe my whole life I've been telling the story, and the Freudian like interpretation never occurred to me." That I finally, because I said, "Look, you did it right. You killed your father once, and then you went on with your life to do other things rather than stick with this."
There's also a parasitic wasp that when it finds I think a cockroach, it'll stab its little stinger in the back of the head of the cockroach.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know this wasp?
No.
Sounds very similar to your dream. It stabs them straight through the head from behind, and then uses, I think, octopamine to puppeteer the cockroach and literally steer it like you would a domesticated horse or something. It controls it. It immediately takes over its nervous system and its kind of ability to move, and it can turn it left and right.
Wow.
So there's a sense in which I, coming 100 years after Freud and having a little bit of updated neuroscientific information, would say that it's not so much about killing your father, it's about learning to puppeteer him.
Oh, interesting. And how would you puppeteer? What's the? You mean like the symbol of him, or?
Yeah. We're still interpreting dreams, but it is no longer you can stab someone through the back of the head with surgical precision and not kill them, but gain all of their powers. I think that's what an estate tax is trying to avoid.
Well, where do we go from here? Should we talk about what's happening in the world? We have not done that. It's amazing. We've been so highfalutin and pretentious and philosophical that maybe a little nod to the weirdness of our time. It is 2020 after all, which everybody seems to be saying is an odd and disconcerting time to be alive, between coronavirus, Donald Trump. Those are the main two things people are focusing people's attention in a way.
Once my brain gets on a thing, it doesn't get off it easily. Like my stories
keep
now
going.
are all going to be about fathers still. Like
okay,
I can
keep
talk
going.
About,
keep going.
No, we can still do current events, but it'll be current events about for like half. My working memory is about half an hour long.
Good.
It's the extent to which my reincorporation humor has an effect, and so. I mean, so one of the tough parts about this is everyone's parents are dying, right? This coronavirus thing it's selectively kind of attacking the elderly.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting to I don't know. I mean, we were talking about Janie, right? About her grandfather choosing to die during this time when people might be otherwise have forgotten about their parents in like nursing homes. Like all these epidemics, they started the peak in San Francisco, or sorry, in Seattle. There was a nursing home. That's what drove everyone's fear, right? And every single one of those probably was someone's parent that was just abandoned to die by febrile coronavirus in a hermetically sealed building where you can't get in or out because you've lost some of your autonomy as an old person. And it seems like such a there's such a lack of dignity in that kind of aging. And I don't know, I feel is this true with Italian culture, where what is respect for elders like in Italy? I've always romanticized retiring.
Oh, it's so much more so, and in Spain too. And I did have a thought about to link coronavirus to fathers also in another potentially interesting way, which is that I meet a lot of people out here in the desert who are conspiracy theorists, also because it hasn't, thank God, like hit too hard here. So a lot of people think that this is exaggerated and like a concoction of the government or the media or something like that. And I remember Alexander Coburn telling me that conspiracy theorists are actually extremely paternalistic believers in this absurd like power in this kind of paternalistic government of ours, or power structures. And so like 9/11 conspiracy theorists, they had a newsletter called Counterpunch, which was, very left-wing news, and they lost a bunch of their audience because they were dismissive about 9/11 conspiracy theories that a lot of the left had and has. And Alexander was saying, it's this belief that only my daddy government can do something this, strong, and there's no way 12 Arabs could blow up our, stick with Freud, our big hard phallus buildings. Only our own government could do that, right? And there's this kind of like faith, even though it's perverted into something ostensibly dark. It's like this feeling of like, I know something that everybody else doesn't know, and it's that my daddy's the strongest. Right. And I think that's a really good analysis of it.
And so we turn the kind of cultural hierarchy of society into this it has this paternalistic role. It has the strengths of it has the imagined strengths of a father figure, right?
Exactly.
Just writ large. Yeah. If you, speaking of paranoid schizophrenics like Bobby Fischer, if you look at the kinds of auditory hallucinations that some schizophrenics have during their episodes, it's always people in power. So this is something that's unexplained and kind of mysterious. And of course, you can take the layer of your worldview and filter it through that and come up with an explanation. But effectively, like, you don't hallucinate. No offense to postmen listening, but you don't hallucinate like the postman telling you what to do. It's either the devil, it's God, it's some of the most powerful celebrities or powerful people at the time. People would hallucinate the voice of Richard Nixon in the 70s, like someone having a schizophrenic episode in the 70s would hallucinate Nixon.
Is it true that also like their auditory nerve is actually triggered when they have these hallucinations? I heard. I don't think the eardrum itself is moving, but I think deeper in, like the cochlear.
So it's extraordinarily difficult. It's like harder than capturing a snow leopard in the hills of Afghanistan to actually get an auditory hallucination to occur inside of an fMRI scanner. Mm-hmm. People have tried for decades. I think I remember in like 2012, someone publishing a paper that they had caught one. Mm-hmm. Like literally like the most, people, conservationists or bird watchers or something, like you want to see the thing that is the rarest thing.
Yeah.
And in neuroscience, finding an auditory hallucination while being able to kind of peer through the keyhole of the mind is the equivalent of catching like the rarest hummingbird in the world. So it wouldn't surprise me that these hallucinations are very similar to actual speech. Mm-hmm. But the thing I find interesting though is that the voices often command, and by virtue of their command, they in some sense have to come from a position of authority. they have to come from Richard Nixon, who has this paternalistic kind of
Interesting.
puppet string ability to he has the CIA and he has the FBI, he has everything. And when it's just so interesting that it's not hierarchy independent, right? It's hierarchy dependent. People's hallucinations, when they're commanding, often come from the perceived role of power. And I, for example, like, I don't have the voice of my father in my head. I don't know what he sounds like. I have never seen him share an interaction with me that I can then, and he like chastised me, and then I can now as an adult be like, oh right, every time I turn the crank on this wheel in this car engine, which I also don't know anything about because I was never.
Did he leave for Belize before you were born, or?
A couple months after I was born. Not for Belize, but my parents split up a couple months after I was born. But so just this.
And you had no other father figure, like your mother never
No, she moved to a nest of Navy SEALs to feel safe. Like just plopped down on an island where Navy SEALs train specifically because it's like, well, I'm a single mother with a small kid. Like, who's gonna fuck with a nest of Navy SEALs? Which is very smart in retrospect. I now get it at the age.
Unless it was the Navy SEALs themselves that one would have to fear, but I guess
no. It was the 90s. It was chivalry was real. Every century, only in the 90s, you have a resurgence of chivalry, like 1790, 1890, 1990s. But so to me, it's this question of, to what degree does my failure to ever listen? I've never been told by a father figure, specifically a father, that I did anything wrong. So I don't have the voice in my head. I have zero respect for paternalistic structures.
Yeah.
Because I never learned how to be embedded in one. I never felt that one was looming over me. It was only a maternalistic structure, right? And so all of these companies, I've worked at startups, I've been in academia, I've had a few spots. I guess even my writing career in some sense has a hierarchy that one builds. And I feel like each of these, academia, especially in a company, they structure things explicitly to have paternal hierarchies, right? They do. And deference happens, and punishment happens, and laughter always goes downhill, or insults always go downhill. There's like very clear hierarchical rules that I, having never grown up in a hierarchy, I just don't respect. And I find it's actually problematic. Like, people can sense that I am not playing the game that they want me to play.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if it's because I never had the paternalistic structure to start with. I never learned how to live within one. And so even something like countries, people have these, as the scale expands, how big is your family unit, metaphorically, figuratively? And some people kind of choose to resolve that scale at the level of the country. Some people choose to at the level of their religion. Mm-hmm. Some people choose to at the level of their town or something like that. And I just don't give a fuck. I just don't care. Like, I feel like no groups. I feel like I'm a part of no group anywhere.
Yeah.
And I think it's because I didn't have this kind of obvious family circle, and because so much of society reflects these structures. So when you go out though, and I don't know, in film, right? You've directed, right? You've directed films. Mm-hmm. So when you do that, do you in some sense play the role of father of the production?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's very kind of, Francis Ford Coppola said it's like the last remaining true dictatorship. It's so hierarchical, you know?
Yeah.
And the director is king. And I remember my mother was like doing some volunteering in the inner cities, and then in LA in the 90s. And she came home, and her father was staying with us. He was dying, and she said, one of the biggest problems that a lot of these kids have is having no father. And her dad said, well, I bet the second biggest problem is having a father. And so I think it all depends what kind of father you have.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I romanticize the absence.
My mother, her father left when she was like 3 years old, and went to Italy and became the spaghetti western star, and was living on a hippie commune. And she grew up hearing from her alcoholic mother what a horrible man her father was, that he had left them, and that all of her resentment and pain was just constantly being heard by her. And when she was about 15, she knew that she had a stronger connection to her father than her mother, than she could admit to her mother, or had a brighter vision of him despite the fact that he had done this terrible thing. So she dropped out of high school in the middle of 10th grade and just went to Italy to find her dad. And sure enough, found that she got along better with him than she did with her mother in a way, and it developed a really beautiful relationship with him, forgave him for leaving. And then he was good friends with my father, who was older than him, who introduced them. So I always had fun telling people that my grandfather was younger than my father. And so she then obviously found another paternal figure in her, in my father. And then he continued to always have, girlfriends and lovers that had what we would today call daddy issues. And today it's so frowned upon, the idea of like a romantic relationship being based on this missing, absent paternal figure. But right. I think we shouldn't be. It happens, and and ideally it could happen in a way that's positive. The for both people in the rapport. So anyways, that's another thing we could talk about is daddies as well as fathers. Thoughts?
I just can't believe how many women show up here with daddy issues at this exact
coincidence. Coincidence.
Tell me, Tad, what is it? Do you like spread the pheromone somehow over Instagram?
What?
Cut.
Easy there. No. No, it's such a delicate subject now. I interviewed somebody who shall remain nameless recently, and I said to him, I asked him what his thoughts were on the male sexual energy in this time of Me Too and of like, a new consciousness. How are we feminist, progressive men supposed to deal with this energy that we have inside us? And this person had written about it, and I said, what do you think? And he said, I don't feel comfortable talking about it, and I don't even feel comfortable being asked it. So I need you to delete this part of the interview and never refer to it again. And I thought, well, this is very telling. I mean, is this really the place we've come to? And is that a positive thing, that there's this only a sense of, I think there's a lot of justified shame when you assume the responsibility of the violence that men have done towards women. And I think that we have to own that as men. And I think we need to be so careful and conscious, and yet we need to acknowledge that there's this force. I think that the safest, not the safest, the most apt metaphor I was able to come up with as I thought more and more deeply about this, also making monogamish, is that male sexual energy is like fire, that if it's harnessed correctly, it can warm us and nourish us, but if we're not careful, it will
sacrifice witches.
It will burn us down. Yes, it can be extremely destructive. So I've come to think of my sexual energy as fire, and my friend Christopher Ryan, hopefully we'll have him on the podcast soon whenever he visits next. But he has this kind of, I think, romanticized view of like letting nature run its course, whereas I have a little bit more of a Freudian, civilization and its discontents, like the idea that we do have to kind of rein it in a little bit in order not to be just untamed ids, right? I think we anyway, these are just thoughts that I'm rambling thoughts on a subject that's fraught with difficulty. And since we started with these wild surrealist tales of Dali and Dado, maybe we can wrap it up thinking about and also, I don't know if we haven't like talked to our listeners or invited them to comment, but I would love for the men and women out there to think about useful ways that we can educate ourselves and fellow men about how, without like ignoring or only vilifying our sexual energy, how do we harness it in a way that's positive and respectful, and also true to this more animalistic side, which also just needs to, obviously we crave that as well, you know.
So I can't get my head around how two men, do you call yourself white? We're white.
Yeah, you don't know
Two
if you're
white
100%
men.
white, right?
I don't know if I'm 100% white. But like two white men talking more about this, right? Like I can't get out of that. And
Yeah.
so that makes me self-conscious to say anything.
Yeah, same.
As with previous interviewee. But so my the fiction I'm writing has a female protagonist, and it's all through her eyes. And to me that makes sense. And to me that's actually very natural, because I spend a lot of my male sexual energy and a lot of my time imagining how the world is looking through the woman that I am thinking about. And so I'm well practiced in the theory of minding into a woman's eyes and imagining the world through female gaze.
Yeah.
Of course that's distorted. Of course I don't have any authentic actual experience or knowledge about that. And I have a very, very good friend who's a actually published fiction writer, and she's written a few novels, and she will, steadfastly only read novels written by female women, and very, very much cares about the kind of gap and disparity in literature and in being an author, and the sex and gender and how it has usually not gone the woman's way. And I was so hesitant to tell her that my main character was a female, because I felt like, even though I had this explanation, it was kind of like scientific. It was the scientific thing about how I feel like I've spent most of my time, so therefore I have enough training data to imagine what the world is like through a woman. So if I spend more than 50% of my time imagining how I look sometimes, how the situation looks to them, to her, that's the kind of lived experience that I can put down authentically in fiction. And but I was still very sheepish to tell this good friend of mine that the protagonist was a woman. And she's like, oh my God, no, keep it. Like, we actually do need more. The male gaze through the female eyes is an incredibly valid thing that people have become terrified to write about.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that another thing that struck me is, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, she made a Fleabag and brilliant little plays. And so she became, and Killing Eve, she, Shakespeare, she's modern Shakespeare. And, or she will be. And she once said, she was asked about James Bond's misogyny, because she's the screenwriter for the new Bond film.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, well, if the character demands him be misogynistic, then he's misogynistic. That's fine. Right? And so it's this interesting embrace of the fact that in the absence, like, rather than silence the kinds of personality traits or the kinds of issues, the daddy issues, the misogyny, the all the kinds of patriarchal structures that guide our lives and our companies and our societies. Like, there are times when and because those dynamics are still very real, they still apply to daily relationships amongst two strangers who meet, who have things that they want to do, that they will do. And to be able to embrace that, and to be able to say that there is a difference between a character, I think about this in fiction specifically, like, a character can have misogynistic traits without the author being misogynistic. And so Phoebe is in some sense doing an incredible service by allowing herself, she's become like a hero and icon, and deservedly, to a lot of writers and to a lot of people thinking about these issues. And she just owns them, and she owns their complexity. And I think that if you can just own the complexity and the nuance of the fact that people spend a lot of their lives looking through other people's eyes, and people have unspoken about issues that play out and are relevant on a daily basis.
And I do think there's something I think there's a reason we should be cautious talking about it, because I do think our role right now, more than anything, should be probably to listen more than to talk. And so hopefully we can have more amazing women on the podcast to help guide us in our fumbling ways. Anyway, I think that's a good way to wrap up for today.
Absolutely.
Thank you, as always, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.